I'll introduce myself. My name is Paul Green, and I'm an assistant dean here at Boston University, and I am the faculty staff advisor for the International Student Consortium and the moderator for this afternoon's program. Just a few notes. I would like to thank all of those who worked so hard to put this program together, particularly the International Student Consortium and their co-sponsors this afternoon, the Center for International Relations, the Palestinian-Israeli Peace Alliance, the BU Hillel Student Organization, the Islamic Society of Boston University, Arabsa, and Hug Don't Hate. And I think this is a tremendous group of students that we have brought together to put this program together for us this afternoon. This evening, we have gathered to hear from Ambassador Dan Gillerman, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and we will have the opportunity to ask questions and engage in what we hope will be an open, lively, and critical discussion of the Israeli-Palestinian relations. Over the past few weeks, I've had the pleasure of discussing this event with a number of people on campus, and particularly one of our faculty members, and she made a comment to me that I think epitomizes what I hope we will bring out of this afternoon's discussion, and that is to say it is to bring this discussion into the open, the normalization of the Palestinian-Israeli situation, and that we will be informing ourselves through civil, thoughtful, and educational dialogue. I want to stress this afternoon that you are attending the second part of a two-part series, so I don't know how many of you realize that. So those of you who were here on April 17th to hear the Palestinian ambassador Afif Safieh, then welcome back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I hope that you will go to the website Be Universe, where you are able to watch Ambassador Safiev's talk and also the question and answer period after that. This session will also be taped, and it will also be presented at the Be Universe website. A note on this evening's program, or this afternoon's program, with the exception of a few remarks from our provost, David Campbell, the format is exactly the same as the other evening. Following the provost, we will hear from BU faculty member Ambassador Charles Dunbar. Ambassador Dunbar served from 1962 to 1993 as a State Department Foreign Service officer and ambassador. In this time, he was ambassador to Qatar and Yemen, and he also was chargé d'affaires at the American Embassy in Kabul from 1981 to 1983. Following Ambassador Dunbar, we will hear from Ambassador Gillerman, and following the ambassador's remarks, there will be time for question and answer period from the audience. Just a note about that, in keeping with the educational mission of Boston University, which is learning, virtue, and piety, we expect the event this afternoon to generate a critical discussion of the Israeli-Palestinian question. We also expect students, faculty, and visitors to conduct themselves at all times in a respectful manner, whether with the ambassador or with other audience members. Should there be any disruption of the program or any inappropriate language or disruptive behavior, you will be asked to stop. If the disruption persists, you will be asked politely to leave the auditorium, and if you do not leave, then we have ways of removing you. So on that happy note, I'm going to invite Provost David Campbell to come to the podium.
I'm not quite sure how to take Paul's introduction. I am not going to be the means of removing you. Good afternoon. On behalf of President Brown and all of us in the senior leadership of Boston University, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the second part, as Paul has said, of a two-part event focusing on Israeli-Palestinian relations with special guest and lead discussant Ambassador Dan Gillerman, permanent representative of Israel to the United Nations. The program offers you a real opportunity, the audience, to engage a leading world political figure on timely and profound issues, specifically related to Israel's foreign policy and relations with its Palestinian neighbors. This is a rare opportunity to ask the hard questions directly of the players, in this instance, political participants, and to hear the answers firsthand. Fostering this type of debate and dialogue across international and ideological boundaries is vital to Boston University's commitment to educate its students to be global citizens who are as aware of issues affecting the world as those affecting their home states and hometowns. As Paul has told you, and you notice a pedagogical technique of repeating information, so beware, this is going to be on the quiz. This afternoon's dialogue is organized and presented by the Boston University's International Students Consortium, a student-run organization that strives to unite the very diverse Boston University community by sponsoring intellectual, cultural, and humanitarian events. This year, the group has been extremely active, putting on such timely and provocative panels as Ask Iran, which was held this past February, an evening with Congressman and presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich, held here in April, and, as Paul noted, the first part of this two-part program that brought the representative of the Palestinian Liberation Organization to the United States to our campus last month. Events such as this are intended to normalize this type of discussion, allowing our community to interact productively with the ambassadors from the two sides of a tense and delicate relationship. But I believe the goal of the consortium is not simply to be provocative. Rather, by bringing disparate parties together, the group hopes to focus on unity and common ground, sentiments and practices that are often forgotten on the world stage. As Paul Green mentioned earlier, this event is co-sponsored by the Center of International Relations, the Palestinian-Israeli Peace Alliance, the BU Hillel Student Organization, the Islamic Society of Boston University, Arabsa, and Hug Don't Hate. The BU community embraces and fosters the ideals of free speech, global citizenship, political engagement, and participation, and recognizes these are our most powerful tools to overcome hatred and violence. We welcome Ambassador Gillerman and anticipate a most stimulating discussion. With that short preamble, I would like to invite to the podium Professor Charles Dunbar, former ambassador to Qatar and Yemen, and now an esteemed member of our Department of International Relations. Charles?
Well, it's a good thing as I was sitting there, I'd done my math wrong, and I was going to speak of 50 in 5 years, but instead I was speaking, it is 60 years since the UN General Assembly adopted its Resolution 181, partitioning the British Mandate of Palestine and presaging the establishment and recognition a year later of the State of Israel. It's been 5 years since the United Nations Security Council adopted its Resolution 1397, in which it envisaged the existence of states of Israel and Palestine living beside each other in the former Palestine Mandate of Great Britain. I'm going to comment very briefly today on where I think the problem that we hear so much about stands, and I'm going to do this very quickly by making 3 points about Israel, 3 points about Palestine, and 4 points about the party that has sought very hard to bring those two peoples together, and that, of course, is the United States. And I will stop after one somewhat pessimistic remark thereafter. So let me say 3 things about Israel. I think the first thing that it's important to mention is that the Israeli leaders and the Israeli people have built a strong, dynamic nation-state with a very high standard of living, whose contributions to human civilization have been many and notable. The Israeli government, and indeed the Israeli people as well, have built over the period of the existence of the State of Israel an unbreakable alliance with the United States that underpins Israeli security. Third, I would say that Israel's continued occupation of Palestine, and I use that term drawn from United Nations Security Council Resolution 1397, has stood in the way of giving Israel the role in the region to which the achievements of the Israeli people should entitle it. That's Israel. With respect to Palestine, again referring to Resolution 1397, the Palestinian leaders and people have built a national movement whose right to exist as a state has been more or less universally recognized. Secondly, the Palestinian national cause has come to be embraced over that period across the Muslim world. Third, the Palestinian Authority has emerged as Palestine's de facto government, but has been unable to bring about the lifting of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, to control the acts of terrorism that make that occupation justifiable, and to establish itself as a citizen in good standing of the community of world governments. 3 points about Palestine. 4 points about the United States. I think, first of all, the relationship with Israel has developed into one of the closest alliances the United States has made since the coming into existence of the State of Israel. I think the United States and Israel are to congratulate themselves from having moved closer to the objective that I learned early on in my diplomatic career, a major objective of both foreign policies, to have Israel able to live within secure and internationally recognized frontiers. The peace with Egypt following the Camp David negotiations at the end of the 1970s, and the peace with Jordan in 1994, a year after the beginning of the Oslo peace process, I think were notable achievements in that regard. Between 1974 and 2001, this is the third point, I would say that the United States played an increasingly active role in brokering peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. First, between the Arab states and Israel, as I've just mentioned, and beginning in the 1990s, a really active effort to bring about peace between Israel and Palestine. The Bush administration has been less active throughout most of its time in office in pursuing that peace effort, and as a result, the peace effort is languished. And that's the fourth point that I would like to make. To conclude, I make the observation that the situation between Israel and Palestine is what it is today because there is absent a hurting stalemate between the two sides. That is to say, it is less painful to live in the difficult situation existing between Israel and the Palestinians that now obtains than it is to take the steps that could be taken to break that stalemate and bring about a peace between Israel and Palestine. Israel is unwilling to deal with its new Palestinian interlocutor, or at least with one of its Palestinian interlocutors that is new, and I'm speaking, of course, of Hamas, because of the positions that Hamas has taken with respect to Israel's existence, the armed struggle, and the unwillingness of Hamas to recognize previous agreements between Israel and the Palestinians. And the Palestinian interlocutor has so far been unwilling to make the concessions needed to allow a dialogue to begin. That is a stalemate that appears to be quite enduring. I would say, thirdly, that the United States has, as I just mentioned, so far found it less painful to not to take a very active role in its effort to broker peace between the Israel and the Palestinians than it has been to remain active, but still less than fully active, in my opinion. I will end there, and I look forward very much to hearing Ambassador Gillerman's comments. Thank you.
Well, I am Bilal Bilici. I'm the president of the International Students Consortium. I would like to welcome everyone to the second part of our dialogue series with the Ambassador of Israel to the United Nations, Ambassador Dan Gillerman. This program, as Provost Campbell and Dean Green mentioned, has two components. First component, we hosted the lecture with the Palestinian ambassador of PLO, Afif Safia, on April 17th. And today, with the Ambassador of Israel, His Excellency Dan Gillerman. Tonight, as you may know, our distinguished guest is Ambassador Gillerman. But before pointing out Ambassador Gillerman's astonishing accomplishments, I would like to emphasize two great men whose legacies can be applied to today's world. One great leader and the founder is the founder of Israel, Ben-Gurion, and the other person is the founder and the leader of Turkey, Atatürk. Like Atatürk, Ben-Gurion planted himself into issues far beyond today's normal politics. Both Atatürk and Ben-Gurion creating a nation in their minds demanding an embrace of the West and its project of modernity. These ideals were practiced both by Atatürk and Ben-Gurion, and even practiced today. And I personally see a friendship between Turkey and Israel which will contribute to peace and to the establishment of the new Middle East. Especially in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Turkey playing the role of being the bridge between two. Ambassador Gillerman is an accomplished diplomat with a sophisticated and well-rounded background. Just to name a few of his accomplishments, he was appointed as the Ambassador of Israel to the United Nations in January 2003. In November 2005, Ambassador Gillerman became the first Israeli representative to successfully introduce a resolution to the United Nations General Assembly. Moreover, in June 2005, Ambassador Gillerman was elected to serve as the Vice President of the General Assembly of the United Nations as an Israeli diplomat in the past 53 years. From 1985, he has served as the chairman of the Federation of the Israeli Chambers of Commerce. He has also served as a member of the board of the First International Bank of Israel, the director of Bank of Leumi and the Central Bank of Israel, as well as numerous other boards of private and public entities. Ambassador Gillerman has also served on the Prime Minister's National Economic and Social Council, the President's Committee of the Coordinating Council of Israel's Economic Organizations, and the chairman of the Israeli-British Business Council, as well as being a member of the executive board of the International Chambers of Commerce. Ambassador Gillerman has played a prominent role in helping to steer Israel towards economic liberalization and a free market economy. He has also been engaged in talks with Palestinian and Arab leaders trying to further economic cooperation within the region. Ultimately, the purpose of this event to emphasize the importance of dialogue between nations, between civilizations, between cultures is an essential building block for peace. A great leader, great politician that I personally admire, Shimon Peres, said, "We are engaged in an attempt to fight dangers not to fight people. The enemy is terror, not religion and not any other nation. I would also like to echo Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's profound words, peace at home, peace in the world, and hopefully peace in the Middle East. Please allow me to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Dan Gillerman to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bilal, for this very gracious introduction. What you failed to mention, and which may at the end of the day be the reason for at least some of my accomplishments, is that my wife and I spent our honeymoon in Turkey over 40 years ago, and in fact celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary on the 17th of April, which I believe is the day the Palestinian Observer spoke to you here. So it all comes together. I must say that when I heard the opening remarks, the threat about not disrupting and about behaving properly and the threat of removal, for a moment I looked around, I thought I was in the General Assembly of the United Nations. But then I realized that you were also addressed not long ago by a presidential candidate. And I remember that it was, I believe, Adlai Stevenson, when running for president in the 50s, who, addressing a room about this size, said to the people in the room, you know, there's a very clear division of labor in this room. It is my job to speak, and it is your job to listen. If you finish your job before I finish mine, you are free to go. At the end of his speech, a young man at the back of the room got up and said, Mr. Stevenson, that's the most eloquent speech I've ever heard. Every decent American will vote for you. Whereupon Adlai Stevenson, in his ultimate wit, said, this is not enough. I need a majority. But anyway, thank you very, very much for this opportunity to speak in this very august establishment and to such a wonderful group of people. Thank you also for allowing me to share some thoughts with you about a country I love very much and am very proud of. And I'll start with a warning that I'm not objective when it comes to Israel. I love that country very much, and I am indeed very, very proud of it. But I must tell you one other thing which may surprise you, and that is that I'm also very optimistic. And it may sound strange for an Israeli, albeit an ambassador to the United Nations, to say that he is optimistic at this very, very difficult time. Because as you know, Israel has undergone a very hot, brutal, and bloody summer. It fought a very, very difficult and bitter fight against a cruel and cynical enemy, a terror organization of the Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. We lost many lives. What followed was a period of great recrimination and remorse and soul-searching and investigations and inquiries, including a committee of inquiry which was set up to look into the conduct of the war, which published its results yesterday and was very critical of the government. We're still facing terror. We're still facing two very, very bitter enemies in the form of Hezbollah in the north and the Hamas in the south. We're facing an Iran led by a lunatic and ranting president who, while denying the Holocaust, is very carefully preparing the next one and threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the map. The world is a world of turmoil and adversity and bloodshed and terror. So how could an Israeli possibly be optimistic? Now, there are several reasons for that. The first is that I am an incurable optimist and romantic. So whatever I say, you'll have to discount on that feature. But I also believe that maybe because of all the dangers and the threats and the phenomena which I have described, and maybe to a very great extent because of the very bitter war we had last summer, we have an opportunity which we did not have before to finally bring some solace, and some peace to the very tough neighborhood we live in. And I seriously think that this very well may be the case. And I'll try and explain why, and I'll try and do it in not too long a time so as to allow you what I believe is the main reason for this meeting, and that is a real dialogue between us and an opportunity for you to ask the toughest questions and for me to pitch the softest answers. I truly believe that we have an opportunity to bring peace to our region. And in a very strange way, I believe that the events we have witnessed and the terror we're witnessing each and every day, and that very bitter war, actually lay the groundwork for what may be a breakthrough of really bringing peace to the very, very tough neighborhood and the very dangerous and difficult place we live in. And I'll try and explain why. I think that today there is a realization in the world, and also, and that is even more important than in the United States or in Europe, in the moderate Arab and Muslim world, that what we saw last summer was really only the preview. As you say in this country, soon to be seen in a theater near you. It was really the first confrontation between a secular democracy and a radical, fundamentalist, extreme, autocratic Islamic regime. This wasn't a confrontation or a war between Israel and Hezbollah. This was truly the first war between Israel and Iran, because Hezbollah is nothing more than the hired guns and the proxies of Iran. The world watched. And I can tell you, in fact, I cannot even start to tell you, how many ambassadors, foreign ministers, and leaders from Arab countries came to me during the first few days of that war in the United Nations and said to me, "Go, girl, finish the job, don't stop." When I sat in the first meeting of the Security Council after the start of the war in Lebanon, and looked at my Lebanese colleague who was sitting maybe 5 yards away from me and said to him, "You know deep down inside, you know deep in your heart that if you could, you would be sitting right here next to me right now and saying exactly the same things I'm saying, because you know what this is all about, and you know that if we win, ultimately, Lebanon will be the winner." And when I looked at him, bow his head, I knew that this was true, that he felt that way. And what happened as a result of this very, very bitter struggle, beyond the changing of the rules of the game and the changing of the rules on the ground and Resolution 1701 and having an international force for the first time ever in Lebanon and having the Lebanese army deploy for the first time in 38 years in southern Lebanon, and an arms embargo which is not fully implemented but which has actually been imposed, and all these important decisions which are reflected in the resolution which put an end to the conflict. The real thing that happened is that the realization of where the real threat was, of where the real dangers are, became very real, not just to the United States and to Europe, but to very important parts of the moderate Muslim and Arab world. They realized, finally, with a very rude awakening, that the real threat was not Israel, that the real problem was not even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that the real threat was Iran, and the real problem was the spread and export of extreme, radical, fundamentalist Shia extremism. That realization hit them in a very, very real way. And I can tell you this from talks with their leaders, with their foreign ministers, with their ambassadors, who came and said, "Look, we must solve this problem. not because it is the main problem, and that is maybe the first point I would like to make. Don't let anybody tell you that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the core of all problems in the world or even in the Middle East. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the cause of terrorism around the world. It's a horrible conflict. It's an unnecessary conflict. It's a futile conflict. It's a dangerous conflict. It's a conflict that we, more than anybody else, want to solve. But it is not the reason for all the world's problems. The real problem is the terror and the extremism, which does not stem from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The real problem is that there is today a fight, a very bitter fight, between the moderates and the extremists. That's really the fight that we're witnessing. You know, about 12 years ago, Samuel Huntington wrote what was considered then, and probably still is, a very important book called The Clash of Civilizations. And what I would like to share with you tonight is my conviction that what we're witnessing today is not a clash of civilizations. What we're witnessing today is a clash of civilization in the singular. Because in his book, Samuel Huntington said that this is a clash between Islam and the West, that the borders of Islam are marked in blood. What I and we see today is that most of the clashes, most of the terror, most of the violence, most of the killings are within Islam. The vast majority of victims who are getting killed every single day by terror are Muslims, whether it's in Iraq or in Afghanistan or in Sharm el-Sheikh or in Amman or in Bali or in Mombasa. And the thing that worries me most is the eerie silence, the sound of silence. Just remember what the reaction in the Muslim world was about a few cartoons in a Danish newspaper. Millions of people went out in the streets. People were killed. Cars were burnt in Paris. Outrage all over the world. At the same time, when thousands and thousands of Muslims are being killed by their own people because of extremism, not a word. You're waiting for a moderate Muslim leader, Arab leader, a brave one, to stand up and say, enough. Enough, we're killing each other. Let's put an end to it. It's as if, and I know these are very tough words, and I don't mean to be provocative, although I'll be happy for provocative questions. It's as if, you know, when Christians kill Muslims, it's a crusade. When Jews kill Muslims, it's a massacre. When Muslims kill Muslims, it's the Weather Channel. Nobody cares. But I think it's changing. And that's the reason for my optimism. Because we can see today in the Arab world moderate countries, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, many others, Oman, Qatar, Morocco, Tunisia to a certain extent, even large and important Muslim countries like Indonesia and Pakistan, finally realizing that it is time to put an end to it. And what we're witnessing, as I said, everywhere, is indeed this battle between the moderates and the extremists. Whether it's Hezbollah against the Lebanese government, whether it's Fatah against Hamas, whether it's Sunni against Shiite, whether it's the Persians against the Arabs. And it's all moderates against extremists. Now I believe there are more moderates, far more moderates. I want to believe, and I do believe, that most Muslims want to live in peace. I believe that no baby is born wanting to be a suicide bomber, that no mother gives birth to a baby envisioning him one day blowing himself up. So there is a moment when it's just too much. And what we've witnessed in the summer and what we're witnessing since is bringing that realization to many parts of the Arab and Muslim world. The summit we saw in Riyadh just recently was not about Israel. Make no mistake about it. It was about Iran. It was held out of fear of Iran and its intentions about Saudi Arabia. So you're seeing a groundswell of grassroots, of intellectuals, of moderate leaders, of writers, of simple people saying enough is enough. And I believe that coupled with that saying comes the realization and the willingness to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not because it's the main problem, because it's not. I mean, if you want a very simple illustration, just imagine a Sunni who at this very moment is leaving a suburb in Baghdad with a sword with which he's going to behead his hated Shia rival. And the Shia leaving at the same time with an electric drill he's going to drive through the brain of his horrible, hated Sunni rival. And they hear on the radio that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was solved. What are they going to do? Go home? Say, now all our problems are over? This is naive, and we all know it. But they are willing to solve our conflict, I believe, because it's a nuisance, because they want to calm their streets, and rightly so, because they believe it's time. And I believe they're willing to do it today under far more pragmatic and realistic conditions than they were willing to do before. For example, I think they realize that a two-state solution means that Israel is the solution for the Jewish refugees and Palestine is the solution for the Palestinian refugees. I believe that they realize that the 1967 border is no longer an issue or an option, because in 1967 there was no Palestinian state and there was no contiguity between Gaza and the West Bank. So I think that there is this realization and the willingness to solve the conflict. What we need now is three things. We need the world to support a Marshall Plan, a vast plan of injecting huge sums of money and investments and incentives and projects into the Middle East, and especially into Palestine and the Arab world, in order to increase the standard of living and the quality of life, because I believe the higher the standard of living, the lower the level of violence, and actually use the economy and use business as an engine which will create confidence-building measures and will prove to both sides that peace has its dividends. I believe that the world, and especially the moderate Arab and Muslim world, should stand up as one and endorse a Palestinian leader, hopefully Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, and say to him, you go for it. Start negotiating. We'll stand by you. We will legitimize whatever agreement you reach. You have the approval and the legitimacy and the support and the moral support of the Arab and Muslim world. And the third thing we need is very brave leaders. Very brave leaders. And I promise you that if the Palestinians produce such a leader who truly is willing to relinquish terror and embark on a dialogue and recognize Israel, he will find in the Israeli leadership a partner who will go very, very far with him in order to assure that those two people, bleeding and wounded and tired, will be able to live together in peace in this very, very tough neighborhood in which we are destined to live together as good neighbors. I believe that is a real possibility. I believe that in a very maybe strange way, the escalation and the violence and the terror and what we saw last summer has served as a wake-up call. And I therefore think that in spite of all the pain and in spite of all the horrors which we have witnessed, and in spite of the very dangerous phenomena we see around us, we do have an opportunity to reach peace and to make our world a better place. Thank you very much.
There's a microphone here at the front of the hall. So if you have a question for the ambassador, we would ask you to come forward to the microphone to ask your question. And we will be able to take follow-up questions depending on how many people would like to participate. And if you do have follow-up questions and there is a long line, then we would ask you to simply go back to the end of the queue to ask your second question. So we would invite you to come forward at this time.
Why do you think it took 38 years for the Lebanese army to take some action in southern Lebanon? And wasn't there a UN resolution, some UN action that told them to do something like that before the war in the summer?
Well, you know, in our region, things take time. And there have been many resolutions which have not been implemented. I think, and this is exactly, ties in with what I said, that the magnitude, the degree of violence and the threat that was demonstrated during July and August has made also Lebanon realize that it must actually exert its sovereignty and its authority over the southern part of Lebanon. And the Resolution 1701, called for the deployment of the Lebanese army and the deployment of foreign troops mandated by the United Nations. And in fact, this is a dramatic change on the ground, because for 38 years, not a single Lebanese tread in southern Lebanon. You must understand that Syria, which is one of the engines of terror and one of the main destabilizing forces in our region, has for 38 years regarded Lebanon as southern Syria. There's no border marked between Syria and Lebanon. There is no Syrian embassy in Beirut and no Lebanese embassy in Damascus. They regard it as southern Syria. But, as you said, about 2 years ago, the United Nations passed a resolution, Resolution 1559, which called upon the Syrian forces to withdraw from Lebanon. And in what many people did not expect to happen, the Syrian forces actually left Lebanon. The second part of the resolution called for the dismantling and disarming of Hezbollah and armed militias in Lebanon. That was not done. And because of that, this very bitter conflict happened. Hopefully now the second part will be implemented, and Lebanon, which is probably one of the most democratic, liberal, modern, and pluralistic societies in our region, will be able to flourish and to come back and go back to what it once was. And Israel will be safe and be able to live in peace.
Why is it possible for a country to just negate UN policy and decide not to do anything?
Well, you know, the United Nations has a moral authority, but it has no armies to speak of. It has peacekeeping forces, but not armies that can impose its will. And some countries, like we see in the case of Iran today, just flaunt UN resolutions and disregard them. And the UN has to keep trying again and again, hoping that a consensus of the international community, a unanimity in the Security Council, and its moral voice will eventually be successful.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom.
What do you think about Saudi Arabia's involvement?
About?
Saudi Arabia?
Saudi Arabia's involvement?
Yes. So do you think they are trying to get involved in this whole melting pot right now?
Yes. Saudi Arabia is involved. And it's a very interesting phenomenon because for years, Saudi Arabia did not want to get involved. Saudi Arabia did not want to get involved, among other reasons, because it felt that once it became a player, it would also become a payer and would be demanded to finance whatever the outcome was. But as I said before, I think that today, Saudi Arabia, maybe more than any other regime in the region, is so fearful of Iran, of Iran's very dangerous intentions, is aware that probably it is the first target for Iranian expansionism, its oil fields and its kingdom, that it is doing what it is doing, mainly out of a will for self-preservation. They're not doing it for any altruistic reasons. They're doing it for very egotistical reasons. But as long as they're doing the right thing, we're happy they're involved.
You mentioned three things that were necessary for potential peace between Palestine and Israel, in terms of supporting a leader and putting money in. And to what extent will that solve the conflict that's going on within the Palestinian territories between Hamas and the PA, in terms of that being conflict between a moderate and an extremist? In other words, those three items that are necessary to support Abbas, for example, in opening a dialogue, how will that I mean, there's still going to be there's this internal conflict that needs to be solved.
There is an internal conflict in the Palestinian society, but I truly believe, I honestly believe, that most Palestinians want peace, that most Palestinians want to raise their children and want to make a living and want to be prosperous. I think that the terrorists are a minority. They're a very powerful minority, they're a very violent minority, and people are frightened of them. But I think that because I believe truly that most Palestinians, most Arabs, most normal people want to live in peace. I mean, it's unnatural not to. And as I said, I don't believe that any Palestinian mother wants to give birth to a suicide bomber. So I believe that because this is the majority, if they get the international support, and more importantly, the legitimacy and the moral support of their Arab brethren and Muslim brethren, if they feel they have this support, ranging from Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates to Indonesia and Pakistan, North Africa, wherever, the Gulf states, who will come to them and say, we are with you, go for it. I believe they will. And I believe that in that case, the terrorists, the extremists will be marginalized. And at the end of the day, this is our aim, to bolster and embolden the moderates and to isolate and marginalize the extremists. And I believe we can do it.
You said that the war last summer was the first confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel, or rather Iran and Israel. And a lot of people in Israel are a little more pessimistic than you are, and they don't say if there would be another confrontation, but when will the next confrontation come? So could you comment on that? And the second is, you also said about having a Marshall Plan and a lot of money put into the Middle East and Palestine and so on. Hasn't an awful lot of money already been put in by the EU, millions of euros and so on, that have been, let's say, siphoned off or borrowed by the leaders of the PLO and never actually got to the people? And how would one make sure this didn't continue happening or happen again, etc.?
Well, first of all, no one can guarantee that there will not be another war. We were hoping never to have wars. We've had, since the establishment of the State of Israel, a war nearly every 5 years. Every father or parent who gives birth to a child in Israel hopes that by the age of 18 he will not have to go to the army, and yet our children and grandchildren will, unfortunately. But I do think, because of what I described, that we do have today a very unique opportunity, because, you know, we live in a dramatically changed world. I believe the world has changed dramatically since 9/11. It is no longer just a world which is divided between North and South. It is no longer a world which is just divided between rich and poor. It is a world which is also very much divided between terror and those who fight it. And this realization is sinking in, is becoming much more commonplace. And that is why I believe that there is this sense of urgency today that wasn't there before, and the awareness of the need and the possibility of solving the conflict, which may allow us to prevent another war. You know, we will always be confronted by extremists. We will always be confronted by terrorists, unfortunately. But if they are marginalized, if they're a very small percentage, if the people realize that peace is doing them good and that the dividends of peace are real. I mean, look at Jordan. Since the signing of the peace treaty with Israel, Jordan has thrived and prospered to an unbelievable degree. About 6 years ago, the free trade agreement between the United States and Jordan was signed. It also stipulated that joint ventures between Israel and Jordan will qualify in order to, so that their products and their produce will enter the EU and the United States duty-free and quota-free. When the free trade agreement between Jordan and the United States was signed, I was actually there at the White House, and I was a guest. I was chairman of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce at the time. I was a guest of King Abdullah. My host was President Clinton, but King Abdullah invited me as a sign of recognition for our contribution to regional cooperation. The exports of Jordan to the United States were $13 million. Today, 6 years later, very much as a result of Israeli-Jordanian cooperation, Jordan's export to the United States are $1.5 billion. Thousands of jobs have been created, and the same is true in Egypt. And I think the people need to feel that there are dividends, that there are fruits to peace, and I believe that we can do it. The other question was?
About the money that was stolen or taken from the leadership of the PLO?
A lot of money was actually channeled into the PLO. Much of it did not reach the places where it was meant to go. A lot because of corruption of the leaders, and especially of Yasser Arafat and his cronies at the time. I believe that today we have a much more accountable and transparent system in the Palestinian Authority. I believe also the world has learned to direct its resources towards projects rather than give it to people. You know, foreign aid is in general a very touchy subject. It was actually President Mubarak who told me at a dinner we had in Davos a few years ago what his definition of foreign aid was. He said foreign aid was taking money from the poor people in a rich country and giving it to the rich people in a poor country. Talking of corruption, I can also tell you that Jimmy Wolfensohn, when he was president of the World Bank, Today we have another president of the World Bank. But when Jimmy Wolfensohn was president of the World Bank, he was the first to actually raise the question of corruption and condition aid by the World Bank on transparency and accountability. And he told me that one day he met the leader of a prominent Southeast Asian country, which I will not mention. And that leader said to him, "You see, Dr. Wolfensohn, what the difference between us is? You call it corruption, we call it family values." So, different strokes for different folks. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate listening to you.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what you think the impact would be on Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of the United States pulling out of Iraq.
Well, the United States is not in Iraq because of Israel. And I don't think that Israel should play a part in the considerations of the United States as to whether to pull out of Iraq or not. I mean, this is a very American issue, a very contentious issue, a very heatedly debated issue. And I don't think it would be right for me to get involved in it in any way. I think this is a very, very American issue, and it is definitely an American decision. America should do what is right for America. Thank you.
This year, the Israeli television showed Israeli soldiers slaughtering Egyptians, prisoners of wars during the Israeli-Egyptian war. And it went to the Egyptian parliament, and they were really outraged, and they were asking to cut the relationship with Israel and go to that extent. So I'm wondering what's the current situation between Egypt and Israel. And I wanted to know if, theoretically speaking, if another soldier, say, is kidnapped on the Jordanian or Egyptian borders, would Israel go to war again with any of these countries for a kidnap?
First of all, I pray that no other Israeli soldiers will be kidnapped. Both the Israeli, Jordanian and Israeli-Egyptian borders have been relatively calm since we've signed peace treaties with both these countries. And I cannot envisage, under any circumstances, a war between Israel and Jordan or between Israel and Egypt. The relations between Israel and Egypt are very good. There is a lot of cooperation between the two countries. There's cooperation in the economic field. There are joint ventures and joint projects. There is a lot of cooperation also in other fields, including the security field. I think that both President Mubarak and one of his top advisors, Omar Suleiman, are very engaged in making sure that the peace between Israel and Egypt remains intact. I'm less overjoyed, I must say, as someone who represents Israel at the United Nations, about the position which Egypt sometimes takes in international forums. We very often find Egypt that has peace with Israel and that has a very good relationship with Israel and is working very constructively with Israel on the ground, being sometimes the most venomous and outspoken critic of Israel in international forums. I sometimes wonder whether it's a way of playing a balancing act, both at the United Nations and in other places. Egypt could play a more positive voice in international forums. But on the ground and bilaterally between the two countries, the relations are very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Ambassador Gillerman. So a lot of us, I'm sure, are somewhat curious about how certain things work in the UN. And this is a little bit of a lighthearted question in a way, but especially when there's animosity between countries, how do their ambassadors in the UN handle it? Specifically, let's say you walk by the ambassador to Iran. You know, do you exchange glances? Do you wave? You know, nod? How does that work out?
It's a very good question, and I'm happy you asked it. Everybody thinks that being Israel's ambassador to the UN is a very lonely job. They think you're an outcast, you're isolated, boycotted, nobody speaks to you. At the risk of the foreign ministry decreasing my paycheck, I can tell you two things. A, I enjoy every minute of it. And two, I don't feel even for one moment isolated or hated or boycotted. For two reasons. One is that I do walk the corridors of the UN with my head held high, because I feel I represent a country which I'm very proud of, and a country that has contributed to the UN, to the world, to mankind, not just to itself or to the Jewish people, more than most other countries in the world. A country that has made limbs move with its medicine and agriculture, and deserts bloom with its agriculture, and that is contributing beautiful art and culture and music and medicine and science to the world every single day. But beyond that, there is a very interesting phenomenon at the UN whereby you can separate your public arguments and even the hostility between your countries from the personal relationships you forge with your colleagues. And I can tell you that I have over the years developed very, very warm, close, personal, intimate relationships with ambassadors who represent countries who do not recognize us and who are even hostile to us. And I believe that by creating those kinds of relationships, which are based on mutual respect and trust, you can bring dividends to your country which are not necessarily numbered by the number of hands raised at a vote at one or another UN forum. And I have only just recently held public meetings, not clandestine meetings, with the ambassador of Indonesia, with the ambassador of Pakistan. Admittedly, my meetings with the Pakistani ambassadors in the open come after about 3 years of very clandestine meetings in dark bars and hotel lobbies. But now they're out in the open. And I would say that out of 192 ambassadors, the one you mentioned and maybe one other are the only two with whom we maybe exchange glances, but not much more. But all the others, some of them have even become, very good friends. And I think it's important. I believe very much in personal relationships. I think that they do count. And another point is that most of the ambassadors to the UN are very senior and very prominent people in their own countries. They're very close to either the president or the prime minister. They're very prominent. Some of them were foreign ministers before they came to the UN. Many become foreign ministers after they leave the UN. Most countries, with the exception of Israel, send their best people to the UN. And therefore, the people you meet are of a very high level. Intellectually, they carry a lot of weight in their own countries, so that by liaising with them, you're actually passing messages also to the capitals. And I think it's one of the most fascinating and, to me, also most gratifying parts of the job.
Thank you for that insight into the UN.
Thank you.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, but
weren't you here before? Or is that your twin?
I'm a very curious person.
Pardon?
I would say I'm a curious and interested person.
Okay. No, it's fine with me. I was just wondering whether, is this allowed? Yes. Okay. I don't want to break the rules or anything of this university. Okay.
We allow follow-up.
Okay. No, that's fine.
I hope I won't get...
You just looked familiar.
I hope I won't get taken out of here. But would you agree that leftist media companies, such as CNN, cast a biased light onto what exactly is going on in Israel, and maybe create a biased view for the viewers in countries like the United States about what actually is going on in Israel? Maybe because it's rooted by an owner that is a Muslim. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
First of all, I think that there is some bias in the news. I think a lot of bias was shown also during the last war. I cannot really tell you that it is divided by networks or by personalities. I've appeared on hundreds of interviews during the Lebanon War on CNN and Fox and ABC and CBS and NBC and MSNBC and Al Jazeera and BBC, you name them, on programs ranging from Hard Talk on the BBC, which is probably the toughest program in the world, to Bill O'Reilly, who is probably the most supportive. I mean, I felt I should stay away of the studio because I'm really sort of getting in his way of being supportive of Israel. And I'm saying this with great respect and appreciation. I think he's also right in supporting Israel.
He is correct.
I must tell you that I found some very sympathetic interviewers in CNN. I don't know even whether it's right to mention names, but I think Anderson Cooper was fabulous during this war, very perceptive, very incisive, very fair. I think Paul Hazan was okay. It's sort of, I don't think there's a dictate from above. It depends on the person, but there is bias, there is misrepresentation. I can tell you that I was given just a few days ago, and it may interest you too. You may know of it, Nadav. By the way, Nadav Tamir is our Consul General to New England, and a proof that we do value this part of America very, very much, because we send you the very best we have, believe me. I was given just a few days ago a report by Marvin Kalb, who I think is part of a small college somewhere down the road here. And he wrote a 42-page report about bias in the media. Did you see it? And I recommend that you read it. I haven't read it yet, but I recommend you read it. But I was told it's very, very, very interesting. So there is bias, and Israel certainly is not portrayed as what it is. I mean, how many of you have been to, except for the Israelis, how many of you have been to Israel? That's amazing. That's great, really. And do you agree that once you see it, once you visit it, once you touch it and smell it and feel it, it's totally different to the perception you get on CNN or on any other channel? If the answer is yes, you can speak. Otherwise, yes. Forever hold your peace.
Yes, but
right.
I would say that that's true of absolutely every country. As the director of international admissions at Boston University for many years, I had the great privilege of traveling all over the world. And the reality on the ground is always different from the portrayal in the media. Always, always, always. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Shalom, Gillerman.
Shalom.
Ambassador Dunbar mentioned earlier that it was a lot easier to maintain the stalemate that exists today between the Israelis and the Palestinians than it is to move toward a lasting peace. And I saw during the settlement withdrawal from Gaza not too long ago Israelis fighting Israelis. And in the event that your 3 steps or your 3 prerequisites for a lasting peace come into existence, do you believe Israel is prepared to move into the settlements in what is to be the Palestinian state and remove those settlements, as it surely will be part of the agreement? Is Israel willing to do what it takes? Is Israel willing to suffer the pains that we saw in Gaza, in the West Bank, and throughout the Palestinian mandate?
First of all, I agree, sadly, with Ambassador Dunbar that generally in life it is easier to maintain the status quo than change. I mean, who moved my cheese was not written by me, but people resent or are usually quite wary of change. It does take probably more courage and more guts to go for a settlement than just to leave things as they are. But the price is far too high. We cannot afford it. We cannot let things fester the way they do. And I don't believe that time is on either side, and I don't believe that a stalemate or a status quo is working in anybody's favor. We need to change the reality on the ground. When the time comes, without in any way entering into drawing borders or removing settlements or any of those things, because we haven't even started negotiating yet, let alone drawing maps. I believe, as I said before, that if a brave, visionary, honest Arab leader emerges who really puts out his hand, he will find in Israel a very willing partner who will go with him a very long way. I mean, just think about it. Whenever Israel was confronted with an Arab leader it could trust, it went all the way. When Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem and said, no more war, no more peace, he found in Menachem Begin, of all people, the most extreme of Israelis, the most right-wing, someone who gave up every single inch for peace, including some inches which we didn't even believe were Egyptian. When King Hussein, who we trusted implicitly and even loved, I had lunch with his wife only yesterday in New York with Queen Noor, reached out his hand for peace. He found in Yitzhak Rabin a warrior, someone who was the commander of the Israeli army in the Six-Day War, someone who went all the way with him to make peace. I'll tell you something which I hope will not be misinterpreted, because it runs the risk of equating Israel with South Africa, and Israel and South Africa are two totally different matters and two totally different situations. But in order to make peace in our very, very tough neighborhood, you needed a Clerk and you need a Mandela. South Africa would never be where it is today if history had not provided that bleeding country with those two great leaders at that moment in time. Israel has, over the last 10 years, provided at least 4 de Klerks. Yitzhak Rabin, who paid for it with his life, Shimon Peres, Ehud Barak, Ariel Sharon, maybe more. The tragedy, the ultimate tragedy, not our tragedy, not the region's tragedy, but the Palestinians' tragedy, is that they were unable to come up with a Mandela. They had Yasser Arafat, who was emotionally, physically, politically, philosophically incapable of making the transition from being a terrorist and a killer to being a statesman and a leader. And I think that at the end of the day, he was his country's greatest tragedy. And it's sad, but unfortunately, one of my most illustrious predecessors, Abba Eban, was right when he said that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I mean, I read the transcript of what the Palestinian observer, ambassador, said here 2 weeks ago. And I must say that, this argument, this constant argument about occupation is becoming such a mantra, because we left Gaza over 2 years ago. Every single inch, every single grain of sand, there wasn't a single Israeli in Gaza. Palestinians had 2 choices. Take care of their people, improve their standard of living and quality of life, make Gaza into a prosperous place, or turn it into a terror base and a launching pad for missiles against Israel. Sadly, they chose the latter. I promise you that once the Palestinians get a leader who is trustworthy by their own people and by us, we will go a very long way with them. Thank you.
We're running a little bit short of time, so we have maybe about 10 more minutes in the program, 10, 15 more minutes. So we'll just take these last remaining few questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I promised to make the answers shorter.
What, in your opinion, is the definition of Zionism to the Israeli public, and how does it affect the goals of the government?
The definitions, the definition of Zionism is a very wide-ranging one. Essentially, it means living in Israel as an Israeli, coming to Israel, making it your home. It has very many manifestations, ranging from the people who came in the 20s and 30s and, into swamps, people who escaped the Holocaust and made Israel their home. And even Stan Fisher, who gave up $10 million a year salary as governor or as vice chairman of Citigroup to become governor of the Bank of Israel while immigrating to Israel, and he's bringing home about $35,000 today a year. That's real Zionism to you. On the other hand, Aleph Bet Yehoshua, a very prominent Israeli writer and novelist, said a few years ago that to him the essence of Zionism is borders. I mean, what are the borders of Israel? Israel is one of the very few countries in the world that still does not live in, not let alone internationally recognized borders, but even we did not yet decide for ourselves what our borders are. So it's a very wide-ranging definition, but to me, being an Israeli is being a Zionist. Living in Israel is being a Zionist.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to Boston and giving that speech. My question is about internal Israeli politics, and it is, what is your stance and your government's stance, given Israel is a democracy and yet Jewish in nature, of the demographic trend where the Arabs may soon outnumber Jews in Israel and its implications on its domestic policy?
I did not hear the last sentence.
And its implications on Israel's internal politics.
Where the Arabs may outnumber?
The demographic trend
right.
where the Arabs may soon outnumber Israelis.
Well, I mean, we're talking about a two-state solution. This is one of the reasons we're talking about a two-state solution. We're not talking about one state because Israel was established on the ashes of the Holocaust and the ruins of the Second World War as a Jewish state. And it wants to remain a Jewish democratic state. We do not want to rule another people, and we do not want to occupy another people. And that is why we believe that the solution is a two-state solution. Israel as a home for the Jewish people, and Palestine as a home for the Palestinians. When that happens, I think that any chance of non-Jews outnumbering Jews in Israel will be very remote, because at the moment we have 7 million Israelis, about 1.5 million of them are Arab. Arab Israelis are better off in Israel. They're not well off enough. I don't think we've taken care of them well enough. I think subsequent governments have made mistakes, which we admit and which we are trying to rectify in dealing with our Arab population. But having said that, the Arabs in Israel are better off. Their standard of living is far higher. Their education is far better than in any Arab country. They also have democracy and justice, which they do not enjoy in any neighboring country. I mean, just to give you an example, Israel is probably the only country in the region. The Israeli Supreme Court is probably the only court in the region where an Arab, or a Palestinian for that matter, can go to court against his own government and get justice rather than get thrown into jail. I think that there's a lot to be done with it to increase the standard of living and the quality of life of the Arab population. They're already far better educated. Many of them go to universities. Many of them have become part of the Israeli workforce. And I'm quite optimistic about Israel living with its Arab population in peace and prosperity.
Actually, my question, was wondering, if there is a two-state solution, and given the demographic trend, would that imply resettling Arabs living in Israel into the Palestinian portion? I guess that's what I was getting at.
Oh, no. I mean, look, I made that very clear, and I think it is very clear. A two-state solution really means that Israel is the home for Jewish refugees, and Palestine is the home for Palestinian refugees. And the Palestinian refugees have to be settled in Palestine or in the Arab countries, just as millions and millions of refugees all over the world have been settled. It's a tragic phenomena where so many millions of people have been held hostage by their own governments just in order to allow this wound to fester. And I think once there is a two-state solution, that will be taken care of. I don't think that there is any idea or plan to resettle the Arabs who live in Israel in other countries. Israel is their home. They're Israeli citizens. They vote. They are represented in our parliament. There's even an Arab minister in the Israeli government today. I think they've come a very long way, and I hope they'll come an even longer way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is, I understand there's a proposal by the Israeli government at the moment to release thousands, I think, Arab terrorists in exchange for the Israeli soldiers that were captured last summer in Lebanon. I just wanted to know your opinion on that.
I don't believe that there is an Israeli proposal to release prisoners. There is an Israeli demand to release our boys who were kidnapped, Gilad Shalit in the south, and Eldad Regev and Udi Goldwasser in the north. There are demands on the Palestinian side for the release of thousands, 1,000 prisoners. You must understand the difference. I mean, our soldiers were kidnapped across the border. The Palestinian prisoners are not in prison for traffic violations. These are murderers. These are people who killed women and children and babies. The Israeli government will have to decide how to deal with this. It's a very delicate issue. It's a very emotional issue. And I certainly don't think that it would be right for me to speculate on it right now.
I was just interested to know because if we look back and you think about the Munich situation and Golda Meir, you know, her position on releasing terrorists in exchange for innocent people, I was just interested to know, you know, what your opinion was on that matter.
Well, there have been exchanges in the past. This won't be the first time if it happens. The price tag, the category, who will be released? Will we release people with blood on their hands? Will we release people who are personally, directly responsible for the killing of women and children and babies? This is a decision, a very painful decision the Israeli government will have to take. But there have been exchanges in the past. It won't be the first time if it happens.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm afraid this will be the last question. I had made my announcement beforehand. I'm sorry.
How you doing, Mr. Gillerman?
Hi, how are you?
Good. When you mentioned Nelson Mandela, I took it as my cue that it was okay for me to ask a question. For a second there, I thought I was in a Klan rally or something. No. But seriously, you began earlier, you were talking about Israel being an objective secular state. And then you start mentioning Zionism at the end of your speech. I want to know, Mr. Gillerman, is Israel really paranoid? I mean, are they really imposing, you know, Zionism on the world? I know this is a very common question, but I really think it's applicable because, I mean, I guess in a way it seems like that because when you look at the European Union, when you look at Southeast Asia, the Muslims in Southeast Asia, when you look at Russia, when you look at the majority of countries that are involved in the United Nations, they're not Zionists, but Israel, in its secular objectiveness, appears to be Zionism. I mean, is Israel really paranoid? Is my aggressive question.
Well, first of all, it was Woody Allen who said that if you are paranoid, it doesn't mean you're not being persecuted. Paranoid? No, Israel is not a paranoid society. Israel is a very free, multicultural, pluralistic society. Israel is a very democratic society. But Israel has many reasons to be worried. When you are surrounded by organizations who are committed to your destruction, who vow to kill as many of you as possible, when you are confronted with an Iranian president who threatens publicly to wipe you off the face of the map and denies the Holocaust while preparing the next one, you have to be very careful. It doesn't mean you're paranoid. It just means you have to be very, very careful. And the Israeli people are a very optimistic people. They are far from being paranoid. You know, you cannot survive in the tough neighborhood we live in and in a country like Israel facing so many dangers if you don't have two very essential qualities. One is optimism and the other one is a sense of humor. And usually optimistic and humorous people are not paranoid. They're realistic, they can be cautious, but they're not paranoid. And I would in no way depict Israel as paranoid. Israel has too many proofs of the dangers it is surrounded with. And the last war in Lebanon, which I started with, was the ultimate proof. And you know, let me just finish with a reminder. We are now in May 2007. In May 2006, I addressed a very large crowd in Washington. There were 4,500 people in the room. It was the annual convention of AIPAC. It was a time, remember, just a year ago, when people were telling us, you know, the Hamas was just elected to the Palestinian government. Give it a chance. It's part of the political mainstream. They'll become moderate. They'll be part of the government. Talk to them. I mean, look at Hezbollah. They are now part of the Lebanese government. Look how nicely they are behaving. They are becoming democratic and part of the mainstream. And Iran, don't take them seriously. Don't take seriously what that president says. They don't really mean it. Engage them. What I said to the crowd on that day is something, because of this very august location, I cannot repeat here. All I can tell you is that in answer to those beseeching us to give the Hamas a chance, look at the Hezbollah favorably and discount the statements of the president of Iran, I used the word which admittedly got me a standing ovation by 4,500 people, but which next day the Washington Post, which devoted half a page to my speech, said that the Israeli ambassador used a barnyard expression involving a bull. That was just a year ago. 2 months later, we saw how moderate the Hamas was when they kidnapped Gilad Shalit. We saw how part of the mainstream Hezbollah was when they kidnapped our soldiers and started the war in Lebanon. And we saw how moderate the Iranian president was becoming. Are we paranoid? No. But I promise you we'll be very careful.
Thank you. I do recognize I'm treading on your territory, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
On behalf of the International Students Consortium, we would like to thank everybody, all of the co-sponsors and all of Boston University departments, Provost Campbell, Dean Paul Green, and everyone. And first and foremost, the Consulate of Israel to New England and Ambassador Gillerman. I would like to call Jessica on stage. We have small gifts. First, I would like to present my gift to the Consul of Israel, Rani. So if you... Thank you. And then I would like to call Consul General Nadav Tamir. Last but not least, our special guest for the evening, Ambassador Gillerman.
Thank you. get two as well? Yeah. I mean, talking of being paranoid, I just want to make sure they didn't get more than I did.
You got two. You are the
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.